Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Nelson, here on this Tuesday afternoon. It's almost Thanksgiving, which means it's almost football, but we're not going to be talking about that today. I'll save that for tomorrow, my Thanksgiving predictions and the teams that I think are going to win on Thanksgiving and how I think a lot of these games are going to go. And I'm also going to probably do a prediction of Sunday's games as well on Wednesday. But we'll see how that goes. So in today's first segment, we're going to be looking at Monday Night Football. And we're going to be talking about the winner. Monday Night Football, obviously, if you guys paid attention, the Ravens, they ended up coming out on top. We're going to be looking at that game. We're going to be highlighting some key plays, highlighting some issues that I see from both teams, and highlighting some things that I think are noteworthy for this game and key takeaways. Then in the second segment, we're going to go in depth on Bryce Young going up against the Chiefs, because I really like that matchup. When Bryce Young matched up against the Chiefs, he looked really good, and I wanted to talk about that and bring some attention to that. Then in the third segment, we're going to pivot to NBA basketball. We're going to focus on injuries and just update the injuries. It was going to be about Juan Soto and his status with the Yankees, but I got trolled by looking at his story because I thought he finally made his decision on who he was, where he was going in this offseason, because that is a big talk in the MLB right now. But it was just an advertisement for Celsius, so oops. But then in the fourth segment, we're going to talk about Saquon being in MVP conversations and the whole debate on whether or not an MVP is a quarterback award, or if running backs, deserve to be in consideration for the MVP. That'll be in the fourth segment. We also have a special fifth segment at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, something that you've just been dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. They really help the show, make it much more interactive between myself and you guys. But if Super Chat's not really your thing, then you can always go ahead and use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That is GSMCpodcast.net. Really helps the show. Makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So with that out of the way, let's go right ahead and get into this first segment, which is going to be talking about the Monday Night Football game and whether the key takeaways of this game. Just how good the Ravens looked and how much more the Chargers seem to need some work, right? They're getting there. The Chargers are getting there, and it took a while for the Chargers to finally be in these kinds of conversations on whether or not they're a competitive team, because for the most part, when they've had Justin Herbert, it seemed like they were basically relying on his right arm most of the time. And this has been the 1 year where Herbert, he has not played phenomenally well. I mean, he has 2,400 yards. He does have 13 touchdowns to 1 interception, but it wasn't like he's been having these sort of jaw-dropping performances night in and night out, like how we're usually accustomed to seeing Justin Herbert play. And he's not even in MVP conversations, despite the fact that his team has a pretty solid record. Before this week, they were 7-3, and again, it's not necessarily like Herbert is playing bad, but it's not like he's been playing the best that he's been able to play. But it doesn't really matter, because the team has been able to sort of get a lot of these wins, and winning games is the most important thing. But so it doesn't necessarily matter that the quarterback isn't really playing well, as well as we expect them to. As long as they're getting wins, it doesn't really matter. And that was a big stigma on Justin Herbert's career, at least in my opinion, where it was like he would put up these amazing stats, but he'd still have like a 500 record as the starting quarterback. And there were also some times where, like, he'd put up these really bad stats, but the team would end up winning in this season. But that's besides the point. Again, now that he's winning, it seems like, all of those conversations about whether or not he is a competent quarterback or whether or not he can win these games have been put to rest. Like, that previous Chargers head coach that they had, really, it seemed like wasn't helping. But the coach that they have now, Harbaugh from Michigan, it seems like, he's finally found his groove as the Chargers head coach. However, in this matchup, it wasn't a very good game, coming in from the Chargers. Well, I shouldn't really say that. I should say that, like, the Ravens, they just have too much firepower on the offensive side of the ball for the Chargers to be able to do anything. Lamar Jackson ended the game with 3 touchdowns, 2 in the air, 1 on the ground. And, I mean, the Ravens, they've looked like a well-oiled machine, aside from their loss to Pittsburgh in the previous week. But aside from that, that was really, like, the only negative spot with this team and with Lamar Jackson. Every single one of Lamar Jackson's interceptions were not his fault. And it really, like, it's incredible that I'm saying this, but, he has only 3 interceptions. And all 3 of those interceptions were because his receiver was unable to catch the ball. Like, the ball would hit the receiver right in their hands, and it would either bobble or it would be deflected over to a linebacker's hands or a corner's hands. Like, it was not his fault that the receiver could not make the play. So, when you look at his stats, 3,053 yards, along with 27 touchdowns. Think of how, like, those 3 interceptions should technically be 0 interceptions. Like, those numbers are unbelievable. And he's most likely, after this game, cemented himself as the MVP favorite. Now, I don't really think it's fair to consider him cement him as the MVP favorite on a week where Josh Allen had a bye week. So maybe we wait, like, one more week until we come to that conclusion and that decision that he is the front runner for the MVP. Because I just don't think it's fair for Josh Allen, especially, considering the fact that Josh Allen, the last few games that he played, in the last game that he played, he ended up beating the Chiefs, and that sort of propelled him in the argument for being the MVP. And another part of the reason why that propelled him into the argument was because the Ravens in that week, they lost to the Steelers. So I don't really think it would be fair to just give Lamar Jackson the front runner to being the MVP right now when Josh Allen had a bye week. That being said, that also does not mean that I don't think Lamar Jackson deserves the MVP, because I do think he deserves it. I just don't think we should name him the easy front runner until we see Josh Allen step on the field again. But those are just my thoughts. In this game, I mean, Derrick Henry, he was phenomenal. 140 rushing yards on the day. He did not have a touchdown, but again, does not necessarily matter when you are rushing for 140 yards. And there's also some debate now on which running back between Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley is going to break the rushing yards record, because they're really close in total rushing yards for this season. Like, I think the difference in rushing yards between the two is like maybe 39. Again, it's really, really close. And Saquon right now is on pace of breaking the NFL rushing yards record. And if he's close to breaking it, then that means, I mean, if Derrick Henry goes off for the last few weeks of the season and goes off even more than Barkley, then maybe he'll break the rushing yards record. Now, Barkley is also really close to breaking the scrimmage yards records, which means, like total yards records, like, rushing yards as well as receiving yards. And that's also it also propels Saquon Barkley to being in MVP conversations. More on that later. But and some people, they might like to put an asterisk on it because, oh, they get an extra game. Meanwhile, the records that were previously set only had like 16 games in the season and not 17 games in the season. But, that's just, in my opinion, hater logic. But this game, it was close. I will say it was close. The Chargers, they opened up with a touchdown. The Ravens opened up with a punt. Then the Chargers punted. Then the Ravens punted it back. And then the Chargers took a field goal after 11 plays and made the score 10-0. Then the Ravens answered back with a 7-play touchdown drive to make the score 7-10. Then the Chargers punted, which the Ravens responded with another touchdown to make the score 14-10. And just before the first half ended, the Chargers responded with a field goal to make the score 14-13. And then in the third quarter, it was just the longest drives you could possibly imagine from both teams, and both teams ended with a field goal to show for it. So basically, nothing really changed in the score. It was 17-16, and then in the fourth quarter, the Ravens, they just pulled away from it. So they answered the fourth quarter with a touchdown, and then the Chargers went 3-and-out, and then the Ravens responded with another touchdown and made the score 30-16, and that was basically the end of the game. The Chargers would punt after a 3-and-out, then the Ravens would punt after 6 plays, and then the Chargers would add a garbage time touchdown with 2 minutes and 22 seconds left, I believe, and that was basically all she wrote. Then the Ravens ended up taking 2 knees, and they ended the game. Actually, wait, no, I lied. They ended, there were only 50 seconds left on the clock when they scored the touchdown. So again, just was not long enough to be able to, end the game or be able to score off of that unless they recovered the onside kick, which again is not necessarily going to happen because teams have to tell the other team when they're going for an onside kick. So basically, while the score looked close and the game was close throughout majority of the game, towards the final quarter, Baltimore pulled away, and the Chargers just added a garbage time touchdown to make it seem like the score was a little bit closer than what it actually was, and at least towards the end of the fourth quarter. But that's really all she wrote. Now, obviously, this propels the Ravens forward. It propels Lamar Jackson and his MVP conversation, and really, there's nothing else that needs to be said aside from the fact that the Ravens, they played great as a team, and the Chargers, they just have a lot more work ahead of them before they can actually be legitimate contenders for the Super Bowl. And I will say that, they do play in the same division as the Chiefs right now, but that division is looking rather competitive. I mean, while the Chargers are also pretty competitive, the Broncos, they seem to be establishing themselves as well. Bo Nix has been playing very well in these last few weeks, and it's going to be a little bit difficult for them to cement a wild card spot, given how, the Chiefs are most likely going to win their division and most likely win the AFC and get a bye week. And, they're going to have to try and they're going to have to try to fight for a wild card spot. Now, with with the way that the AFC is looking right now, with the Ravens and then the Dolphins the Dolphins emerging, we can already scratch that either the Ravens or the Steelers, they're going to either host a home wild card or an away wild card. Those two teams are most likely going to make a wild card spot, and so that would mean that there would be 2 wild card spots left for AFC teams. Now, the Broncos, they could end up winning. They could end up winning and end up taking an away wild card spot. The Dolphins, they seem like they're on the rise as well, of taking a wild card spot. There's an argument that maybe the Bengals could take that spot as well, or the Colts can take that spot. So the Chargers are going to have to fight if they want to make the postseason this year. But I mean, that's all that I really have to say with both of those teams. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the second segment where I talk about Bryce Young and his performance against the Chiefs, because it was surprisingly good. I did not expect the game to be this close but it was. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the... Hold on, let me move this chair out of the way. And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we're going to be talking about Bryce Young and his performance against the Chiefs, because it was very, very good, and I was very surprised with how well he was able to duel against Patrick Mahomes. And before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, something that you've just been dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. They really help the show. And if Super Chat's not really your thing, you can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment, gsmcpodcast.net, to send in your comments and or donations that way. They really help the show. They make it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So with that out of the way, let's get into this surprisingly good quarterback duel between Patrick Mahomes and Bryce Young. Now, as we both know, I'm sure all of you guys know if you paid attention to football, Patrick Mahomes has not been playing well this season, or at least not playing to his standards that we usually expect Patrick Mahomes to play at. And Bryce Young, for the most part, he has not really lived up to that high draft pick that and sort of messiah to the Panthers like a lot of people expected. I mean, everyone sort of expected Bryce Young to emerge as a really competent quarterback in this league, and at least in the first season that he played, it didn't really happen. And all the attention was on CJ Stroud and how much better he was than Bryce Young. And now it seems like, at least at this moment, the tables have turned. I mean, last week in Week 12, I mentioned how CJ Stroud, he ended up losing that game, but he played worse than Will Levis, who's been through most of the season has been a joke, at least in the beginning of the season. And so the fact that he got completely outplayed by Will Levis and was one of the big reasons why the Texans ended up losing, and now Bryce Young almost outduels Patrick Mahomes and that ridiculous Chiefs defense. Now it seems like, the conversations have sort of flipped itself in whether or not Bryce Young is actually going to be, the starting quarterback of the future for the Panthers. Now, in this game, Mahomes completed 27 of his 37 passes, threw 3 touchdowns, and did not throw an interception. And we're usually used to Patrick Mahomes throwing his what is that interception in the game. Like, literally, that's what I like to call it, because it's like we barely ever see Mahomes make mistakes, aside from this season where we're seeing him make a lot of mistakes, and those interceptions are like, what on earth was that? Like, what was that? What was going on? And The other players on the game, Kareem Hunt ended with 68 rushing yards. There were no rushing touchdowns in this game. All of the touchdowns were passing touchdowns from Patrick Mahomes. And Noah Gray ended with 2 passing touchdowns, with 2 receiving touchdowns, And DeAndre Hopkins ended with another touchdown as well. All of them were thrown by Patrick Mahomes, obviously. And on the Panthers side, Bryce Young, he ended the game completing 21 of his 35 passes for 263 yards, and he also threw for another touchdown. And obviously, Chuba Hubbard ended with a rushing touchdown on the night as well. And they scored 2 touchdowns in this game, compared to the Chiefs scoring 3. So there were a lot of field goals taking place. And I mean, the numbers, aside from the 3 passing touchdowns to 1 passing touchdown, the yards that Bryce Young was able to generate through the air, they were almost on par with Patrick Mahomes' yards through the air, right? Now, the game went like this. Kansas City opened up with a touchdown, then the Panthers responded with a field goal, where the Chiefs answered back with a field goal. Then the Panthers responded with a field goal, then the Chiefs answered with a field goal. Then the Panthers punted, and then the Chiefs ended up scoring a touchdown to make the score 20-6, and then the Panthers, to end the first half, ended with a field goal. Now, when the score was 20-9, I just immediately assumed that the Chiefs' defense was going to hold up. I mean, it was just Bryce Young, and they hadn't been able to score a touchdown at all in the first half. So I didn't really expect the game to end the way that it did, and the game to be this close. And I was expecting the Chiefs to either not necessarily run up the scoreboard, but I was expecting them to, keep this game, not keep this game close. That's what I meant to say. But to open up the third quarter, the Panthers opened up with a touchdown to make the score 20-16. But then the Chiefs opened up with a touchdown and answered right back to make the score 27-16. And then the Panthers ended up taking a field goal. Then both teams exchanged punts. The Chiefs ended up punting one more time. And then on the Panthers' final drive, they ended up scoring a touchdown to tie the game 27-27. However, there was too much time left on the clock for Patrick Mahomes to be Patrick Mahomes. And they ended up they did not score a field goal. They ended up converting on a 2-point conversion. The Panthers ended up converting on a 2-point conversion thanks to Chuba Hubbard. And they tied the score 27-27. I knew my math was off. But then, the Chiefs, they had the ball last. And usually when you give the ball to Patrick Mahomes last, there's really no return. There's a big chance that Mahomes is going to just seal the game right there, never give you the ball back, and you're going to lose because you just did not get a chance to touch the ball. And that's exactly what happened. The Chiefs, they ended up holding the ball for the final minute and 46 seconds, and they ended up winning with a field goal. So it was really the big reason why the Panthers ended up losing this game was because they did not get a chance to touch the ball again. And now it's looking like the quarterback situation, at least from the last few games that we've seen Bryce Young play in, it would look like the situation is fixing itself. Because when Bryce Young, at least in the beginning of the season with Bryce Young, he was absolutely awful. And he was so bad that he ended up getting benched. I mean, throughout this season, he's thrown 6 interceptions and he's only thrown 5 touchdowns. And obviously, he was benched for a little bit. But those interceptions and those touchdowns that he threw, I mean, it's a very bad touchdown to interception ratio. And let me just go ahead and just look at these games. Just to make sure that I'm right. So after he finally got back into the starting lineup with going up against the Saints, he threw 1 touchdown and then he threw 1 interception. So again, pretty bad mistake there. But the backup quarterback for the Panthers, I mean, he looked like Andy Dalton looked like he would be a little bit better, but again, it was only a matter of time before he continued regressing and turning back into the Andy Dalton that a lot of people know. And that was when everyone was at least It was really against the Commanders. That was when the Panthers were like, all right, we might as well keep starting Bryce Young because maybe he'll develop into a much more solid quarterback than what he is. And so far, it seems like it's working to their benefit. Like, despite the fact that he threw an interception against the Saints, they did end up winning the game in the end. Obviously, we know that they beat the Giants, but it's not really that difficult to beat the Giants. And now he puts up a really solid game against the Chiefs. So, is Bryce Young going to stay the starter for the Panthers? Personally, I'm not really a big fan of Bryce Young. I don't think he's really that competent of a quarterback, to be playing long term. I'm not going to say that he was bad in this one against the Chiefs because that would be ridiculous. I mean, the Chiefs' defense is one of the best in the league, and he was able to tie the game, and the reason why they ended up losing was because they never touched the ball again. Now, despite this, however, I don't think this is something that the Panthers are going to want to live with long term. Now, I'm not a big fan of Bryce Young. I don't think he's that good of a quarterback. Like, while he does have his moments, he also has a big problem with him is his height. I mean, he can barely see over the offensive line, and doing that makes it a little bit more difficult to read defenses. And some of his throws are like, what on earth is that? And it's, I don't know. Like, I'm just not that big on Bryce Young. And, like, a lot of people, they might say, maybe you're being a little bit too harsh. And, like, he did not have a really good situation for him on the Panthers in his first year. But to that, I say, that was the reason why he was drafted number 1 in the draft. That was the reason why he was picked so high. Because they expected him to be a difference maker, and he hasn't really shown that he can be a difference maker throughout his time on the Panthers. So I don't really think this is something that is going to stick with him long term. And this performance, I think this was a little bit of a fluke performance going up against the Chiefs, but it's still an argument like worth discussing. It's still on the table that he can be a solid quarterback, so I'm not going to completely shove it away, even though I don't think it's going to pan out the way that a lot of people are hoping that it will. But that's all that I have in this second segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the third segment where I do a quick injury update on most of them, not all of them, at least, most of the important players that we have updates for on the injury and when they're expected to return. So I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we're going to be doing a quick injury update, some of the players and, the expected timetable and when they're supposed to return. So we're going to just dive right into this, mainly because we are running low on some time. And we're going to start with the player that I'm sure a lot of Celtics fans are so happy that he's finally back, Kristaps Porzingis. Now, I couldn't get his entire head in the frame because he's just that tall. And really, Kristaps he was back. He played against the Clippers. The Celtics, they ended up winning 126-94. And him returning is actually rather early. A lot of people, and there were reports saying that he would return in, in December, and not this early not in late November, but he ended up making a return in the game against the Clippers last night. And I mean, regardless whether or not he returned or not, I expected the Celtics were going to end up winning in that matchup against the Clippers. And it's good seeing him back, but there are also several other stars that are not going to make this list, mainly because I wouldn't have enough time to cover every single one of them. But I'm going to be looking at some of the key players, like for each team that was either supposed to be in talks of being in the playoffs and making it a little bit competitive. And, since this one was the first one, he ended up being the first on this list because he made his return. Now, the other star on this list who has been injured for a substantial period of time is Ja Morant. Now, he missed the last 8 games due to a right hip subluxation. I have no idea what that word means, but that's what the doctors are saying, so don't at me. And he also had a pelvic muscle strain as well. Now, there's talks that he's going to be in the lineup on Monday against the Portland Trailblazers, and I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that he actually played in that game, because I did not watch the Memphis game. I did not have the subscription for that, but he did play in that game. He ended the game with 22 points, 11 assists, and it would seem like he's, despite the injury, that he's back to playing at 100%. Now, despite the fact that he was gone, it would seem like the Grizzlies, they still have a solid team without Ja Morant. Obviously, Ja Morant makes the team all that more competitive, but since he was out, the Grizzlies were 5-4 without Ja Morant in this season. And Scottie Pippen Jr., he's been playing very well. He put up 30 points on 13 for 16 shooting, along with 10 assists in a 142-131 win against the Bulls on Saturday. So, I mean, the Memphis Grizzlies, they didn't really suffer all that much without Ja Morant. They were winning regardless. It just shows, the depth that the Grizzlies had. I remember a couple seasons ago, there was actually debate on whether or not the Grizzlies were better without Ja Morant, because they were on, I believe their record without him was 20-2. And, I mean, this just shows, the depth that they have and just how well they can develop their players and make those players competitive. Especially, Zach Edey, he's been playing really well this season, and if it weren't for Jared McCain also playing really well, then I think he'd be a lock for Rookie of the Year. As of right now, again, the season is still early, but again, this is just, the update on his return. So he's back, he's playing. Let's hope he doesn't get injured once again, and let's hope he doesn't do anything that would warrant him being suspended based off of things he does on IG Live. But we'll see what happens. Now, another player that's been injured for a majority of the season, in fact, since the start of the season, DeJounte Murray. Now, as you guys know, he was traded from the Hawks and landed on the Pelicans. A lot of people expected the Pelicans to be competitive, but the Pelicans, they've been awful. They've been really bad this season, one of the worst teams in the NBA, mainly because of a lot of injuries. DeJounte isn't the only player who's out. Zion is also out indefinitely. We don't have a timetable on his return, so there's no real update that I can give you about the status of Zion. And there was also CJ McCollum, who is the next player that I'm going to talk about. But again, this team has been incredibly injured, and when you don't have the star players, especially the player that you traded for, without a starting center as well, there's a problem. There's obviously going to be a huge problem in the lineups and being able to win in these games. So, as we know, Murray, he broke his left hand in the season opener, and he's most likely going to miss his 17th straight game when the Pelicans visit Indiana on Monday. He will be in the lineup, however, when they host the Toronto Raptors on Wednesday, according to Haynes. After starting the season with 2 consecutive wins, the Pelicans ended up losing 13 of its last 15 games and just, being awful. And they're 4-13 right now, and no one else seems to really be healthy. Before Murray came back, they could get a boost in the backcourt from CJ McCollum, but who's also been upgraded to probable for the Pacers game. And as we know, McCollum has missed the last 13 games due to a strained right adductor. And also, as we know, Zion Williamson, he seems to be out indefinitely. Herb Jones strained his right shoulder. Jose Alvarado strained his left hamstring and is going to remain out. And Brandon Ingram is suffering from a sore right calf and is listed as questionable against Indiana. So all of these players on the Pelicans, they're suffering from major injuries. And, I mean, you can see that the team is just suffering because of that. And the Pelicans, being at 4-13, that's not ideal. This was a team that was expected to not, at the very least, make the play-in tournament and have a chance of being able to make the playoffs then, which is what they seem to do even without having key players in their lineup. And I mean, Zion, he ended up going out in the last play-in game against the Lakers despite dropping 44 points. They ended up losing, but they still ended up making the playoffs that year. And as we know, it's just unfortunate what the Saints are going through. Now, I'm not bringing up the 76ers because I have no idea what is going on with that team, and I have no idea just why Joel Embiid isn't playing a bunch of these games. I don't know why he's just listed as unavailable for some of these games. I mean, Paul George, he is injured as well, but again, it's expected that he's going to be out for a few weeks. And it's a train wreck over there. It's really bad over in Philly with basketball, mainly because Joel Embiid. It doesn't really seem like he wants to play, but I digress. Now, the last 2 players that I'm going to talk about are Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. They've been injured for quite some time, primarily Kevin Durant. Now, Phoenix, they started out 8-1 this season, but ever since Kevin Durant ended up going down, they've gone 1-6. Going from 8-1 to 1-6 without Kevin Durant, it really shows the value that Kevin Durant brings to a roster. This has been a very similar story for Kevin Durant's career so far. I mean, ever since he was on Brooklyn, the team, they would start out strong, then he would go down with an injury, and then they would regress and ultimately make their playoff chances all that more ultimately make the playoff chances all that more difficult. And the trend is just repeating itself while he's on Phoenix. And I mean, going 1-6 without Kevin Durant is really, really bad. And going 0-5 without KD or Bradley Beal is also not ideal. And now the Suns, they're 9-7, and they hold the 8th spot in the Western Conference. So they dropped all the way from number 1 down to number 8. It's very competitive over there in the Western Conference. And I mean, they haven't played a game since last Wednesday, and it's officially listed that both Durant and Beal are going to be probable in the Lakers game. But again, this is just really bad for Phoenix. And the fact that you need these players to even have some sort of success in winning games, it's going to be a little bit more hectic once playoffs come around, because it's what happens if Kevin Durant doesn't really play well in some of these games? What's the answer then? What happens if Bradley Beal doesn't play well in some of these playoff games, which seems to be a trend of his? what's going to happen with Phoenix then. In my opinion, it was a big reason why they ended up getting swept in the first round, because they lacked the depth to be able, and the scoring depth, because this team is dependent on KD and Bradley Beal and Devin Booker. They have to play well, and that ultimately puts way more pressure on both of those players, because it's like if they don't play well, they know they're going to lose, and you don't want that kind of pressure if you're a player on any team. You don't want that pressure of like, oh, you need to drop 30 points in order for the team to be successful. And based on the last few seasons with Kevin Durant, it doesn't really seem like he can get the job done all by himself. But that's basically, those are my opinions, and I mean, those are the updates on the injuries. That's all the updates that we have. Chet Holmgren, there's no update on his return yet, and like, I know he's very valuable to the Thunder, but I will say the Thunder, they've still been able to win some games without him. However, again, they really need him if they want to be able to compete in the postseason. But again, he was listed as out for mostly like 8 to 10 weeks, so it is going to be a while until we hear an injury update coming in from him. But and the Thunder coming in from Chet Holmgren, but we'll see how that works, and we'll see if they're able to sort of continue winning and continue maintaining a high seed to better their chances of making the postseason. But that's all that I have in this third segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the fourth segment, where I talk about the NFL MVP award, because Saquon is now getting in these MVP conversations, and I'm going to talk about whether or not I agree with that, whether I think that the MVP should be an award for quarterbacks, because there is the debate about that. So I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be looking at the NFL MVP and the front runners for it, primarily, to the two quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and as well as Saquon Barkley, who is now getting into a lot of these MVP talks. Now, ever since Saquon broke the Eagles' record for most rushing touchdowns in a game and is on pace to breaking the single-season rushing yard record, as well as the single-season scrimmage yard record, there are talks that he deserves to be in the MVP conversation right now. And let me just go ahead and pull up the odds real quick. And that exempting him from the MVP conversation would be unfair to him. So right now, the MVP odds are looking like this. Josh Allen is leading the odds, according to CBS Sports at least. So Josh Allen is leading the odds with 150 plus odds. Lamar Jackson is right behind him with 275. And right behind Lamar Jackson is Saquon Barkley, who has 500 MVP odds. And the last running back to win an MVP, I believe, was Adrian Peterson in 2012, when he was really close to breaking the rushing yard record if he did not break the rushing yard record. I don't think he did. I'm pretty sure the rushing yard record was from Eric Dickerson a long time ago. And I mean, like, what year was it? 1984, I think it was. And there have been several running backs who have, won MVPs in the past. I mean, Sean Alexander is one of them in 2005. Marshall Faulk, Barry Sanders, Emmitt Smith, LaDainian Tomlinson, just to name a few. And it's it's not really common for a running back to win this award. I mean, remember the last time a running back won the award, it was over 10 years ago. And it's on top of the fact that it's just a completely new era of football where it's like a quarterback friendly era. It doesn't really seem like there are opportunities for running backs to be able to win the award. And the way that I see it, like because there's a lot of people that like to make the argument that MVP is not a quarterback award, that, you know, running backs are also valuable, this, that, and the other. To that, I think it's blasphemous. I honestly think it's blasphemous, because you cannot tell me that a good running back is more valuable to a team than a good quarterback. You simply cannot tell me that. Like, I don't agree with the fact that I completely agree with the fact that MVP is a quarterback award, because it's like, now that's just how it works. That's just how football works. Now, if quarterbacks are playing bad and a running back is playing absolutely ridiculous, then yeah, give it to the running back. But more often than not, quarterbacks are going to win this award because the quarterback is the most valuable position in football. There's no argument about that. And, like, no good running back is more valuable to a team than a good quarterback. As good as Saquon Barkley is playing this season, he's not more valuable than Josh Allen on the Bills right now. Like, the Bills, they would not even be in the position that they're in without Josh Allen. The Bills would not have won the game against the Chiefs without Josh Allen. And the same thing can be said with Lamar Jackson, where the Ravens, they wouldn't be in the position without Lamar Jackson and his ridiculous season that he's having. Now, Derrick Henry, he is playing phenomenally well along with Lamar Jackson, and so there could be a little bit of an argument that, you know, because Lamar Jackson has that help from the running back, that he shouldn't be in these MVP talks. But his numbers, I mean, Lamar's numbers, they speak for themselves. I mean, only throwing 3 interceptions this year, and he won the MVP last year, and he already has better passing yards, he already has better passing touchdowns, and he already has less interceptions than what he was able to accumulate in last season when he won the MVP. So there's no reason why Lamar should not win the MVP this season. If Josh Allen continues playing this well, then Josh Allen definitely deserves to be in this MVP talk. But it's not the fact that it's a quarterback exclusive award. It's just that good quarterbacks are going to be more valuable to a team than good running backs. And a big year that I like to I like to use this argument to sort of better the fact that it's like, you know, it's a quarterback award. That, remember Jonathan Taylor? There was one ridiculous season that Jonathan Taylor had where a lot of people, they expected Jonathan Taylor to win the MVP. Now, I don't remember. I think it was, I'm just going to go ahead and just check to be sure. I'm pretty sure it was in 2021 when Jonathan Taylor was in the conversations of being the MVP. And, I mean, his numbers that year were incredible. I'm not saying that they weren't. But to put him at MVP over a good quarterback, I don't think that's, like, legit. Like, that should not happen. And, I mean, ever since the offensive line on Indiana hindered, because the offensive line on Indiana was phenomenal in 2021, once it took a step back, Jonathan Taylor also ended up taking a step back. In fact, he took a huge step back. He's never been able to achieve those big numbers that he was able to do ever again. Not to mention, I mean, he hasn't even been, the media barely talks about Jonathan Taylor now. And it's like, no good running back is going to be more valuable to a team than a good quarterback. And we've seen it with Saquon Barkley on the Giants. I mean, I will say, he was great on the Giants, but there were some games where he would have some really bad rushing games, and mainly because the offensive line was not producing enough and not doing enough to allow Saquon Barkley to make these plays. Without an offensive line, a running back could really hinder in their performances. However, if you have a good quarterback and a good difference maker at quarterback, then the offensive line wouldn't necessarily matter all that much. Now, I'm not going to say that a quarterback is independent of an offensive line, but any good quarterback can find ways to win no matter how bad the offensive line can be. Like, we saw Eli Manning lead the Giants all the way to the Super Bowl when the Giants' offensive line was ranked 31 out of 32. Now, that shows the value of having a good quarterback. Like, a good running back would not be able to do that with how bad that offensive line was. A good running back would not be able to win those games that Eli Manning was able to win, and would not be able to show up in the big moments when the rest of the players aren't really playing that well. Granted, I will say that quarterbacks, yes, it's a team sport. This is the most team sport in all of America right now. Like, in my opinion, football is the most team sport. You need good players at every position. You need solid matchups, and you need to make sure that everybody is doing their job in order to effectively win games. That being said, the most important position and the most important player that needs to play well is the quarterback. If the quarterback is not going to make good decisions in these games, then more often than not, you're going to lose a lot of these games. It doesn't matter how good a running back can be. Eventually, teams are going to figure out a way to stop that. And it doesn't matter how good the offensive line can be. I mean, chances are it's like, if the team has some good blocking, then they're going to end up winning a lot of these games. But if a team has a good offensive line, then any running back can really thrive under a good offensive line. So I don't see a good running back being more valuable than a good quarterback, especially when the quarterbacks are Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Like, we see Josh Allen, and we see the type of throws that he's able to make, and he's toned down on the interceptions and the turnovers this season, and it's like, even when the pocket collapses, we can see that he can still create opportunities for his team, either by running it himself or making a ridiculous throw. Same thing can be said about Lamar Jackson, and in the previous years when Patrick Mahomes was able to win MVPs, we were able to see that from him as well. Like, despite the fact that the offensive line would collapse at arguably the worst times, Mahomes would still be able to scramble, and he would still be able to make plays and give his receivers opportunities to catch the ball. And that was a big reason why they were able to win these games, and why they were able to be a ridiculous scoring threat in a lot of these games. Because without Patrick Mahomes, the team wouldn't go anywhere. And at least in the previous years. Now you can say that he's a little bit of a liability sometimes, but that's besides the point. These two quarterbacks are incredibly valuable to the team, and the teams would not be there if they did not have Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson under center at quarterback. And, I mean, we saw it with Huntley, how the Ravens, they sort of did not play well at all with Tyler Huntley at quarterback. And, I mean, with the Bills, we haven't seen a running back on the Bills that was like, oh, fantastic, since you-know-who. And on top of that, the Eagles, they have a very solid quarterback with Jalen Hurts as well. So, again, Jalen Hurts is not, like, having a MVP caliber season like we're used to. But, again, it's the value that he brings. Like, we already know the value that he brings. It's just accentuated now that Saquon Barkley, I mean, he's been able to do all of these ridiculous things, primarily because the offensive line is that good. But those are my thoughts on it. And, I mean, I just can't see a running back winning, being considered more valuable than a good quarterback. That's just me, though. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. That's also not to take away from the amazing season that Barkley is having. But with that out of the way, we can go into our break and then go into the final segment, which is going to look at I'm going to recap all of the NBA games that took place yesterday and give my predictions on the in-season tournament games that are going down later tonight. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this final segment, we're going to be recapping all of the games, the NBA games that took place yesterday. And then we're going to go into the predictions for the in-season tournament games that are going to be happening today, as well as the potential outcomes for a lot of these games. Now, let's go right ahead because we are a little bit low on time. The Mavericks, they ended up beating the Atlanta Hawks. Kyrie had 32 points. There was no Klay Thompson in this game, and it seems like they did not really need him. And he was the biggest player for this team. Trae Young ended with 18 points and 16 assists, but again, just wasn't enough for the Dallas Mavericks. To go up against the Mavericks. Zachary Resacher, 2 for 8, 5 points. Just an awful number 1 overall pick in this draft so far. Despite this, however, it would seem like the Hawks, they still lead in the division that they're in. In the group that they're in, and they're 2-1 right now, and they're ahead of the Boston Celtics because they ended up beating the Celtics. So as of right now, they're the top team in their respective group play, but we'll go ahead and I'll do that a little bit later because it is a little bit tough to explain. Yesterday, the Knicks completely destroyed the Denver Nuggets. OG Anunoby ended with 40 points. Brunson ended with 23 and 17, and Karl Anthony Towns ended with 30 points and 15 rebounds. I think the Timberwolves made a huge mistake in getting rid of Karl Anthony Towns, and it was literally like, okay, this team, they were one series away from making the finals. Let's trade away our second best player. Nikola Jokic, he dropped 22, 7, and 7, but it wasn't enough to beat the Knicks. I believe Russell Westbrook had 24 points in the fourth quarter, which is the most points in a quarter that he's ever scored. He was the leading scorer for the entirety of the Nuggets, 27 points, along with 3 assists and 3 rebounds and 2 steals, along with 1 block. Just an overall solid performance. He also shot 9 for 16. Great game coming in from Russ. And the Warriors, they ended up losing to the Brooklyn Nets, a game that I was very surprised to see. Steph Curry ended with 28 points, and Dennis Schroeder ended with 31 points. Now, it should be noted that in this game, the Warriors were up by 18 points midway through the third quarter. Then the Brooklyn Nets called a timeout. After that timeout, the Nets went on a 57-29 run and came out with the win, which is incredible. Like, that is ridiculous. And it's the Warriors, maybe the Warriors are slowing down. We'll see how it goes, but it would seem like they're slowing down. But again, a little bit early to tell. The Pistons, they ended up beating the Raptors. That's a real shocker in my opinion. I did not expect the Raptors to lose this, especially with Scotty Barnes dropping 31 and 14. Very good for fantasy, by the way. But again, this was just a ridiculous win coming in from the Pistons. I mean, it was a really close one, 102-100. I did not expect that. Now, Orlando Magic, they ended up beating the Hornets 95-84. LaMelo Ball dropped 44 points and he still lost. 44 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists. LaMelo is incredible at basketball. He is what you call a hooper. That is what you call him. He is a hooper. He had 30 points in a previous matchup and he's lost. He had 50 points against Milwaukee and he lost. And now he had 44 against Orlando and still lost. It is ridiculous the amount of points he's able to produce and the team still can't win. Pacers, they end up beating the Pelicans. They ended up winning 114-110. Halliburton dropped 34 and 13. And really I didn't expect this game to be all that close, but again, the Pacers, they don't have competent defense. The Celtics, they ended up beating the Clippers. As we know, this was Kristaps' return, and they did not disappoint. This game was really never close, 126-94. The Grizzlies, John Morant's return, ended up beating the Portland Trailblazers 123 to 98. Again, another game that was never really close. The Thunder, despite not having Chet Holmgren, did not really seem all that affected, as SGA dropped 37 points and 11 assists and ended up beating the Kings. And, I mean, the Kings, they are not figuring it out. And 30 points from DeRozan, 14 points coming in from De'Aaron Fox. Again, this was a team that I was rather skeptical about because they rely heavily on two-point shots and mid-range jump shots as opposed to shooting three-pointers. And they went 8 for 32 from 3 in this game, and it's really not looking good for the Kings right now. I mean, DeMar being on the team, you can argue that it makes little difference. You can argue that it actually hurts the team a bit more because, again, the 3 best players on the team are elite at scoring two-pointers, not scoring three-pointers, which is not ideal anymore. So those are the recaps for last night's game. It was quick because I do want to get into tonight's games. And now the in-season tournament and their standings right now. Orlando holds the number 1 spot in the Eastern Conference thanks to a point differential. Milwaukee holds the number 2 spot, surprisingly. And the Hawks hold the 3 spot. And the wild card, which is the 4th spot, is held for the Knicks, who are also flawless in this in the in-season tournament games. Now, on the Western Conference, the Warriors have already clinched a spot in the in-season tournament. They're the only team that has clinched. Houston is 2-0, and they're waiting to play Minnesota to see if they clinch as well. The Lakers are also 2-0. The Lakers are undefeated in the in-season tournament, by the way, and they are 2-0 right now and the only reason why they are not in like the 2nd spot is due to a point differential from Houston. And the Mavericks, they are 2-1, and they hold the wild card spot as well. Now, in these games, the games that are going to be going down today, the Lakers, they're going to match up against the Suns. I believe if the Lakers win this matchup, then they're going to clinch the in-season tournament. They play away at 10 p.m. on TNT, and I think the Lakers are going to come out on top with this one. I have no idea whether or not Kevin Durant is going to be playing. I also don't know if Bradley Beal is going to be playing, but if they do play, then it might seem like it would seem like they're going to be able to beat the Lakers, but I have faith in LeBron. I have faith in Anthony Davis. I think the Lakers are going to be able to win this matchup. Next, the Wizards, they're going to go up against the Bulls. I'm going to pick the Bulls in this matchup. The Bucks, they're going to match up against the Heat. Even though the Bucks are playing really well right now, I am still not going to pick them. I'm going to pick the Heat. I do not have faith in the Bucks. And I think the Heat are going to be able to come out on top in this matchup. Again, if I'm wrong, then so be it. I like seeing Giannis thrive. But again, I just have no real faith in the Bucks and in that team. I put my faith in them in the beginning of the season. I can't do that now, especially with Doc and Darvin Ham as their coach. Now, the Timberwolves, they're going to match up against Houston. If Houston wins this, then I believe they clinch as well, and they'll end up hosting, well, not really hosting, but they'll end up earning a spot in the in-season tournament game. And they're going up against the Timberwolves. I think Houston is going to end up winning this matchup. And finally, the Spurs, they're going to go up against the Jazz. I'm going to pick the Spurs in this matchup. The Spurs, they've been on a roll recently. They're finally a positive team. They're 9-8 right now. And the Jazz, they're 4-12. I think the Spurs are going to come out on top in this matchup. So that's all that I have on this 5th segment, and that's it for the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, a burning question, or anything that you're just dying to share. We're all ears. And if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then you can use Super Chat. You just click on the $sign below the chat box. And if Super Chat's not really your thing, you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. That's all that I have today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.